I lied to my family about college and moved states. That's how they found out. Before we dive in, Reddit Pearls needs your help. The channel is struggling, and every like and sub makes a huge difference. I appreciate you sticking around. Now, let's jump into the story. If you asked anyone who knows me today, they'd probably describe me as confident, stable, and grounded. But what they wouldn't see, they'd never guess, is how hard I fought to get here. Not against the world, but against the people who were supposed to care the most. My name is Jonah. And growing up, I wasn't just overlooked, I was intentionally forgotten. My parents, Patrick and Marin, had a favorite from the moment he was born. Roman, my younger brother, was everything they wanted. Charismatic, handsome, the type of kid who drew attention without trying. I, on the other hand, was just there. Quiet. Average. Easy to ignore. They didn't start neglectful in the way that screams abuse from the outside. No, it was subtler. My birthdays were afterthoughts. My wins went unnoticed. If Roman drew a crooked stick figure, it went on the fridge. When I brought home straight A's, they barely looked up. I learned early that I wasn't supposed to stand out. It wasn't just emotional. Roman got the better clothes, the bigger room, and the better gifts. He got to choose where we went on vacation. He decided what we watched on TV. I was expected to adapt, to accommodate, to never make waves. By the time I was applying for college, I already knew the rules. Roman was the main character, and I was a shadow. But then, something unexpected happened. I got accepted to one of the top colleges in the country. A full scholarship. The kind of place that opened doors. The catch? It was several states away. I remember telling my parents, expecting maybe, just maybe, would be the moment they saw me. But no, my dad immediately shut it down. Said it wouldn't be fair to Roman, who hadn't gotten into a good school. Said I should attend a local college to keep the peace. That was it for me. I agreed, with one condition, that I be allowed to live in the dorms for the college experience. They agreed, and I lied. I took my scholarship and left. Moved to another state, started my life, and didn't look back. They didn't even notice. For years, I kept up the act. Told them I was at the local college, and used the money they sent to cover living expenses. And in that time, I thrived. Graduated early. Landed a six-figure job. Built a real life away from them. It's wild, isn't it? The people who should know you best didn't even realize you were gone. Those first few months after leaving felt unreal. Not because I was scared, I wasn't. I was free. But because I kept waiting for the phone to ring, for someone to realize something didn't add up. I wasn't attending community college back home. That I wasn't coming home on weekends or asking for help with classes. But the calls never came. I moved into a modest apartment just off campus with two roommates I met during orientation. They weren't perfect, but they were supportive. We studied late, split groceries, and helped each other clean. They treated me with the kind of basic respect I never had at home, and it felt revolutionary. The school itself was everything I hoped for. My professors were tough but fair. The students were competitive, but in a way that pushed me forward. I majored in computer engineering, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged somewhere. I could speak without being talked over. Back home, I kept the lie alive. I gave vague updates. Texted now and then. Said school was fine, and classes were busy. My parents didn't ask questions. They were too wrapped up in Roman's life to dig deeper. He'd started dating a girl from their church. My mom was obsessed. My dad was helping him get his driver's license, even though I'd had to pay for mine myself with money from a part-time job. Their world moved on without me, and I let it. By my junior year, I was working as a part-time developer for a tech startup in the city. It didn't pay much, but it gave me experience and a network, and it made me feel in control. Like I wasn't just studying for a future. I was already building it. The job turned into an internship. The internship turned into a job offer. Right after graduation, I accepted a full-time position and moved into a new apartment, a one-bedroom, downtown, small but mine. Every piece of furniture, every fork in the drawer, every framed photo on the wall, I chose it. I earned it. I kept the lie going. Told my parents I had a job with a local IT firm. Said I still lived near them. I even created a fake email address with a domain from the college they thought I went to and sent myself school updates in case they ever checked. But they didn't. Until the day my dad called out of the blue, and everything started to unravel. It was a Tuesday morning. I had just brewed my coffee and sat down to answer a few work emails when my phone rang. The name flashing on the screen stopped me cold, Dad. I hadn't heard from him in over a year. Our contact was limited to the occasional group text about the holidays or Roman's milestones. A direct call from him was so rare, I almost thought it was a mistake. I let it ring twice before answering. "Hey, Jonah," he said, like he hadn't been absent for most of my adult life. "Can we talk?" I said sure, already bracing myself. What came next was unexpected. He told me he and Mom were planning a big anniversary party, some over-the-top backyard gathering with catered food and dozens of extended relatives. Roman would be there, of course. They wanted me to attend, not because they missed me, not because they were proud, but because, and I quote, "it would look weird if you didn't show up." That sentence broke something open in me. Not once during that entire conversation did he ask how I was doing, not where I lived, not if I was happy. Just this vague, rehearsed expectation that I'd drop everything to be their backdrop. I kept my voice calm. I told him I couldn't make it. Work conflict. He didn't push too hard, just sighed and said, "Well, your mother will be disappointed." After the call ended, I sat there in silence. The bitterness that bubbled up wasn't new, but this time, it wasn't sad. It was clarifying. I realized something I hadn't admitted to myself before. They never asked about my life because they never believed I had one worth asking about. And I had proof now. Years of distance. Years of silence. Years of them never noticing I was gone. I started writing it all down that night. Every lie I'd told. Every moment they ignored me. Every milestone they missed. I wasn't doing it to make a scene. I wasn't even planning to send it. I just needed the truth to exist somewhere outside of me. And the more I wrote, the more I realized I wasn't ashamed of the distance. I was proud of it. I created something real, meaningful, and fulfilling without them ever noticing. But that call stirred something in my father. Because a few weeks later, he called again. And this time, he knew I didn't live where I said I did. Update. A few weeks after that strange call, I was just starting to think the tension had passed when my phone rang again. Same name. Same number. But this time, the energy was different. Sharper. More direct. I picked up, and my dad didn't waste time. "I talked to someone from your old school," he said. "They said you never enrolled there." The silence between us stretched for what felt like hours. I could have lied again. Could have made up some excuse about transferring or a clerical error. But I didn't. I exhaled slowly and said, "Yeah, I didn't go there. I left. I moved away. I got a scholarship and went somewhere else." The line went quiet. I think he was more stunned by my honesty than by the betrayal he assumed I'd committed. He asked why I'd lied, why I'd kept it from them for so long. And for the first time in years, I told him the truth. I told him how it felt growing up in that house, how Roman was the center of everything while I became a footnote, how I worked for everything I had while they handed Roman the world. I told him about the birthdays they forgot, the college acceptance they dismissed, the pain of being the invisible child. He didn't argue, didn't deny it. He just said, "We didn't know. You didn't ask," I replied. That was the end of the call. No screaming. No apologies. Just a heavy silence that felt more honest than anything they'd given me before. Later that week, my mom texted. Her message was long, full of flowery guilt and half apologies. But the most revealing part was this line: "You should have said something sooner." As if it were my job to beg to be seen. I didn't reply. This update isn't about revenge. It's about relief. About the freedom that comes when the truth is finally spoken out loud, even if it lands on deaf ears. For the first time, I wasn't the one carrying the shame. I wasn't the one hiding. They knew now. And that changed everything, not because it healed anything, but because it confirmed what I'd always suspected. They never saw me, but I see myself now. After the truth came out, I expected something more. A confrontation, maybe. A barrage of texts. One last effort to pull me back into the fold. But it never came. Instead, things got quiet. My parents didn't reach out again, and Roman? I don't even know if he knows what's going on. If he does, he's stayed out of it entirely, which in a way is fitting. He always existed in his own world, one where everything revolved around him. And as strange as it sounds, I wasn't angry. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt still. With the truth finally in the open, I had no reason to hide anymore. I updated my social media with real details, my real city, my job, my actual alma mater. I posted photos from my graduation that had never made it online before. I started writing about my experiences and then shared a blog post about being the forgotten sibling. I expected backlash, maybe a passive-aggressive message from a relative. But instead, I got quiet support from people I barely knew growing up. Classmates, coworkers, and even a few extended family members reached out. Some of them said they'd noticed things, that I always seemed edited out of the family narrative. One distant cousin admitted she thought I had dropped out of school. Another said they didn't even realize I'd moved away. Their messages weren't surprising, but they were affirming. It wasn't just in my head. I was forgotten. I was overlooked. And now, I wasn't anymore. I started therapy around that time. My workplace covered part of it, and after years of brushing it off, I finally said yes. The first few sessions were rough, mostly me untangling guilt I didn't know I still carried. But over time, I found language for things I buried. I learned how much I minimized myself to survive, how being invisible had shaped the way I approached relationships, work, everything. I'm not fixed. I'm still learning, but I'm not broken either. And that alone is more healing than any apology I could have received. I've thought about visiting home, but not for them. Just to see the town again. To stand in front of the house I grew up in and remember that I got out. Not with their help, but despite their neglect. I don't know if my parents will ever try to reach out again. If they do, I'll listen. But I won't shrink to make them comfortable. Because this version of me? He's not going anywhere. It's strange how life keeps moving forward even when people from your past are standing still. That's what it felt like after I stopped expecting anything from my parents. There were no dramatic gestures, no emotional reckonings, just silence, steady and uninterrupted. And in that silence, something began to grow. Peace. I threw myself into work. The job that started as a tentative step into independence had become something solid, something I was proud of. I got promoted. Not because I was trying to prove anything, but because I had finally started believing in my own value. My coworkers noticed. My manager noticed. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was waiting to be validated. I knew I belonged. Outside of work, I built connections that felt real. I started going to meetups, joined a book club, and even got invited to someone's friend-giving. These weren't people who knew my past. They didn't need to. They knew the version of me I'd become, the one who didn't apologize for taking up space. Therapy continued to ground me. Some weeks were hard, digging into the parts of me that still flinched at conflict or avoided praise. But other weeks were breakthroughs. I learned how to stop filtering my reactions through the lens of whether my parents would approve. I started noticing when I was making choices for myself instead of shrinking back into invisibility. I also started permitting myself to grieve, not just the relationship I wish I had with my parents, but the years I lost pretending everything was fine. The birthdays spent alone. The big wins I downplayed. The parts of myself I muted just to keep the peace. Grieving those things didn't mean I was weak. It meant I was finally honoring the kid who never got what he needed. There's a photo on my fridge now, me on graduation day, holding my diploma, standing in front of my apartment building. It's not a perfect photo. My hair's a mess. The lights are off. But it's mine. And it reminds me every day that I didn't wait for permission to build the life I wanted. I just built it. I still don't know if I'll ever hear from my parents again. But I also don't need that call to feel complete. I've learned that closure doesn't always come from others. Sometimes, it's a decision you make to move on, to let go, to live fully even if no one claps for you. This life? I created it. Every piece. Every step. And I'm not walking backward. Update. It's been nearly a year since that last awkward call with my father, the one where the truth slipped out and neither of us tried to stuff it back in. Since then, the silence between us hasn't been filled. Not with phone calls. Not with visits. Not even with blame. And honestly, I think that silence has been the most healing part of all. At first, I thought closure would come with an apology. Maybe a handwritten letter. A confession. Something to show they finally saw me. But it didn't. And the longer I lived in the stillness, the more I realized I didn't need it. My life is nothing like the one I grew up in. It's not flashy. It's not loud. But it's honest. It's mine. I share space with people who care to ask how my day went and mean it. I wake up without dread in my chest. I go to sleep knowing I'm building a future with people who chose me because of who I am, not despite it. The version of me they remember, the one who kept quiet, who swallowed disappointment, who tiptoed around Roman spotlight, is long gone. I stopped shrinking to fit their narrative the day I chose to leave. Everything since then has been one long exhale. Sometimes, I wonder if they tell people they have two sons. If they mention me in conversations or scroll through old photos pretending they were more involved than they were. Maybe they do. Maybe they don't. I'll never really know. What I do know is this. I'm not waiting for them to catch up. Not anymore. This isn't a story about estrangement. It's a story about release. About learning that not all families are built on blood, and that walking away doesn't mean failure. Sometimes, it's the beginning of everything. So here's the final update. I'm not angry. I'm not bitter. I'm just done waiting to be loved the way I deserved from the start. I've stopped hoping for recognition. I've stopped clinging to a version of them that never existed. Because I've built something better. And I'm not going back. What hit me hardest in this story wasn't the silence. It was how normal it had become. It wasn't one big moment of rejection, but years of being slowly erased by the people who should have been watching closest. And when he finally chose to leave, it wasn't revenge. It was clarity. It was a quiet decision to stop waiting for permission to exist. What did he build afterward? That was real. That was earned. That was the closure his family never gave him. And honestly, the only one that ever mattered. If your family failed to notice you were hurting or gone, how would you have handled it? Have you ever built your life from scratch just to escape being ignored? Let's talk about it in the comments.